Jinx, I get you. The problem is the leading voices in the online goth sphere don't want goth to be counterculture. If you look into people like Angela Benedict, Cadaver Kelly, the guys from Cemetery Confessions, etc., they all claim it's just a style of music, and that's all there is to it. They reject the dark, macabre, nihilistic, and eerie. They reject the philosophy, claiming it's just stereotypes, and makes the scene look bad in the eyes of normies. I don't get why they are so terrified of being stereotyped, and what the people think of them that the subculture originally developed to rebel against, or at least get away from. I mean, I agree that the music is a necessary condition for being goth, but is it also a sufficient condition? I think not. Well, hi, welcome back, everyone. So, I've had multiple people talk to me about the subject matter of goth. And I thought, it's been a while since I've done a video that was specifically addressing goth. And also, it's been a while since I've done a video where, I can do like effects and have a different backdrop, and instead of just sitting at the computer and looking at things and giving an argument. So, as you saw at the beginning, the comment from Edgy Intellect, well, guess what? He's not the only one that has commented and talked to me about the goth counterculture. And it is a counterculture. At least it started off that way. The thing is what is happening to goth now is the same thing that happened to punk. Punk started to be taken over by, well, not taken over, but the advent of pop punk happened, and thus a brand of punk became popular. The hippies kind of experienced something similar, and that they saw all their counterculture icons that were very anti-establishment, fuck the system, fuck the machine kind of thing. They started noticing, well, these counterculture people that wanted nothing to do with pop culture and fame and, well, just, being normal or sorry, I needed that nicotine. I needed it. The the status quo, suddenly, they start hearing their favorite counterculture artist playing in grocery stores and malls and stuff, and it's like this stuff is becoming popular. Well, it never meant to be, and that, I mean, on its own accord, fine, but it wasn't supposed to be a part of the mainstream. And that's something that hippies, goths, and punks all have in common. We're actually this counterculture stuff is an off branch that goes back to the beatnik era and something called beatific smile. It absolutely all comes from the idea of counterculture, something that is a counter narrative to the mainstream. Absolutely. That's goth, punk, hippies, that's all the same. And most of the people that are in that frame of mind and treat it as a lifestyle live as such and do as such. Goth is very nihilistic. That's why I get irritated when people, say that I sound like a Marxist or Frankfurt School or whatever. I come to my political position as libertarian socialist, or I arrive at anarchism via nihilism, not Marx. A great way to captivate this is lyrics by a goth band called Mephisto Walz. The lyrics are, it's a song called Kings. And the lyrics are, the things that claw and the things that gore are unreliable things. And so is a man with a sword in his hand, and snakes and rivers and kings. Basically, it's saying that whether you're a king that is oppressing the people, obviously that's a thing that claws, things that gore, things that's causing harm, or whether you think you're the righteous sword of justice, come to liberate the people, causing death and destruction in your wake. Regardless, these are things that claw and they're things that gore. You can't win unless we collectively decide to stop doing this to ourselves. Goth is all about individual expression. Goth made fun of fashion. Christian Death, the name Christian Death, the band Christian Death. Rozz Williams didn't come up with that because atheism. He was making fun of Christian Dior and making fun of fashion. And goth and punk and hippie is anti-fashion. It's anti-conformity. All of it. And what a lot of gothic YouTubers do today, or what the young generations do with goth, is this notion that goth is solely about the music. Maybe in your generation it is. Maybe the young generation it is, because, mainstream has got a hold of it now. And every time mainstream gets a hold of something from counterculture, it has this uncanny knack of just making it not about that thing. Like, well, now we have to uniform it, and we have to cut the edges off. We have to make it more relatable, more consumable, blah, 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 blah. And there's no edge to it. A lot of early goth rock was very experimental. It did branch off of punk, so it is the sister to punk. There's a lot of commonality. I don't think goth is as angry. It's angry, but it's more expressed in sadness. And yeah, there is a lot of element of gaunt and melancholia and eerie and death. One of the things that I did a video on ContraPoints a while back, and it's really, I gotta tell you, it's really hard making a video trying to go against somebody you agree with on a lot of things. The only reason I did it was to be a contrarian, to be anti-mainstream, to be anti-pop culture, because that's part of being goth, being a rebel, being a contrarian, being like, how many things can I say or do that I can get away with to piss people off? I'm angry. It's causing me to be sad and nihilistic. What can I do to make an oxymoronic statement of it all? And one of the things that one of the videos was, ContraPoints made a video about goth. She said, oh, goth means the death of decadence or opulence or something like that. And I was kind of like, I guess, kind of, sort of. Goth sort of just represents death. I mean, there's a lot of goth songs from Gothic Rock artists out there that talk about how everything declines and falls, everything burns to the ground, everything fails. It is very nihilistic. That's sort of how goth came to be. As Eva O explained it, you had punk, and during the punk era, you started having these punks that were more interested in the darker elements of things, serial killers, nihilism, Nietzsche, things like that. And they started congregating together away from the other punks, but not completely separated. But, the darker punks got together, started making music, and you have goth rock, goth punk, death rock, and the very manyest versions it has. But when it really started, like punk itself, goth rock itself, it's all very experimental. It wasn't about uniformity and conformity. It was the opposite of that. That's part of being in the counterculture. That's part of the mindset. When I do things, when I look for music, I don't look for music because it is goth. I look for music that is dark, because I like dark, melancholic, creepy, eerie, nihilistic stuff. I like those things. I forgot to turn off the AC. Hopefully I can scrub that out of the audio. So I didn't go out looking like, oh, I'm going to buy all black and I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to do things that are goth because they're goth. It's not that I put on goth as, let's say, use a metaphor like a shoe. It's not like goth was a shoe and I put it on. No, that's a terrible metaphor. I like Gothic Rock because it fits the things that I already liked. It's not that I found Gothic Rock, Goth Punk, and said, well, I need to revolve my life around this aesthetic. No. And in fact, a lot of goths, I mean, like this whole attire I have, which took a lot of work, considering my neurogenic TOS, to squish my old ass into this fishnet and some of the stuff I used to wear back in the day. It's not a lot of goth, like Rozz Williams and stuff, like they would wear. They'd always look like sort of punkish, bohemian, rustic. That's normal, but not always in all black. Sometimes white, because it's not about fashion. Like, fuck you, you fucking conformists. It's not about fashion. We don't all need to look alike. This is an expression of individuality and the deliberate attempt to revel in my own madness and to deliberately be strange and bizarre and weird. To push that sort of status quo. I don't want to be a normie. I don't want the normies to be like me. I want to be different than them. They're a bunch of tribalists. They're a bunch of conformists. Ew. And that's what goth is kind of turned into. You see a lot of gothic YouTubers, they say, well, it's a music-based subculture. And I know my friend Cassandra carries this, but this is a new thing. Goth, much like punk in the early days, goth in the early days, it was a lifestyle. It was a state of mind. It wasn't necessarily how you dressed or what music you listened to. There's goths out there, OGs, original goths, that would listen to Cyndi Lauper. Because Time After Time is kind of a somber song. You know? It's like, I gravitate towards the somber. I gravitate towards the nihilistic nature of it. I gravitate towards that 16th century, like, dulcimer and, like, cellos and chorus, and it's incorporated into this punk, I don't, like, fuck the machine kind of atmosphere, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It was a matter of time for me to find Gothic Rock. I mean, like, it was just inevitable. It was going to happen someday. The fact that its very existence was here, it was just a matter of time because of who I was, who I've always been as an individual. And it's very much about individual expression and being yourself and not trying to conform to and pretend to be like everyone else and fit these social normalities that make no fucking sense. That's why, you know, we're all weird looking. It's like, because this isn't really weird. Society tells you that. So, as Gitane Demone put it at one point, she said, you know, maybe this is a fashion phase for some people, but for me, it's the art of being and feeling blue and capturing that essence of blue. She's talking about depression, blue, like blues. She was very big into blues music. That's why she did a remake of Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday. It's about being blue. And for her, it made her feel very sexy to be weird and gaunt. You know, she liked it. It's about individualistically how you want to self-identify, express yourself. It's very much about individuality. And seriously, fuck fashion. That's why I made a Gothic makeup tutorial where I just went shh. It's not supposed to be pretty. You're supposed to look dead. It's death aesthetic. Duh. But no, it in the early days, it wasn't just about wearing all black. It wasn't about the makeup. The makeup actually came from the punks. They started doing that first. Like many countercultures, we're called freaks. Well, the hippies were called freaks. And so were the punks. And so were skateboarders. And so were grunge rockers. They were all called freaks. Well, goths were too. We wore that label with pride. I'm a freak, whatever. Yeah. I enjoy being one. I enjoy freaking you out. So I want to tell you what it was like, you know, when I entered into the, like, when I found the goth scene, and I was like, oh my god, there's all these people that love all this horror stuff and think darkly inclined, like, this is fucking fantastic. All right, but so they wanted, like, you were expected to probably have some level of Gothic Rock, Gothic Punk music collection. Probably expected to have that. I don't know that people would call you a poser or anything like that if you, I mean, because you had Tori Amos or Ani DeFranco or something like that. I mean, that I don't think that they necessarily cared if you wear black all the time or not. That wasn't the important thing. What they would look at, though, is anti-conformity, definitely a big part. Anti-fashion, another big part, which seems like anti-mainstream, anti-pop seems like mainstream and pop love to grab things from countercultures. They love to do it. They love to grab things from anti-fashion. As was once said to me by someone, people in the fashion industry actually like people like you more than you think. You might be anti-fashion, but they love you because you're always willing to do things fashionably that most people don't want to, because, you know, you have the balls to do it. You don't care what other people think. It's like, well, that's nice, but they keep stealing our shit. But, you know, those are some core fundamentals. But another thing, it was also about various types of media, not just music. There were movies, like Dario Argento's trilogy of Suspiria, the Three Sisters. There was Suspiria, Inferno, and then finally released several years ago. It took them a long fucking time to come out with this movie, the fucking final one, Mother of Tears. You have the movie Gothic, which is about Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, Dr. Polidori, and the kinky little sex parties and stuff where they would drink brandy and opium wine and write scary stories and participate in orgies. You have movies like Nosferatu, Phantom der Nacht, Nosferatu, Symphony of Horror, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which also might be a requirement, the literary works of the Shelleys, as well as Lord Byron and Edgar Allan Poe and many other Gothic poets and writers. The Goth community, when, what the fuck was her name? Anne something or other, the person who wrote the vampire, an interview with a vampire, whatever her name was. When that came out, when I entered, that was highly rejected by the Goth community, believe it or not, because it was too mainstream. And she was all into vampires, and it's like, vampires are cool, but I mean, you're taking it like being a vampire is your lifestyle, and that's not the Goth lifestyle. It's interesting, but not the same. You know, the vamp kids, the beginning of the vamp kids. So, you had movies that were, you know, like if you didn't have at least one of these, you know, people might look at you a little funny. Because it wasn't just about the music, it was about the movie, it was about literature, it was about art. Like Gothic art, like from, what fucking century was it? Like, Victorian art qualifies, even though that's not technically Gothic, it's sort of a Gothic resurgence. Like Bauhaus type stuff. That's, you know, from the German art school. Bauhaus structurally, like, design architect was very, very much, very, very similar to the Victorian style in many ways, but very different in a lot of ways as well. But, I mean, you have things like Gothic cathedrals and gargoyles and the fable and lores, that type of stuff. Religiously, I'd say Goth is very secular. I'd have to agree with Voltaire on that. It is very secular, although most Goths, when I came into the scene, were either atheist or satanic. You did have quite a few that fell into the Egyptian religion. So, not just any old polytheism, but very, very specifically Egyptian theology. But the overwhelming majority of Goths that I've personally met were very atheistic and nihilistic. Like, me. So, like, if you were to go back into that time frame when I came into the goth community, and you came up and you were like, oh, I have Sisters of Mercy, I've got Bauhaus, I've got Alien Sex Fiend, I've got the Virgin Prunes, I've got the Chameleons, and I love their work. They may not necessarily, they could say, well, you could like Gothic Rock and not be goth. You could say, well, I like Lord Byron's work, I like Edgar Allan Poe's work, I like Mary Shelley's work. And they might say, well, you can like those things and still not be goth. And then if you dress up in all black and you go around touting this stuff, they might call you a poser then. It's okay to like gothic stuff and not be gothic, but to claim that you're goth when you're not goth, oh, no, that was poser label. They expected you not just to have the scene in general. They expected you not just to have the music, the literature, the art, the movies. The dress was there, but it wasn't as important as you think it was. You might think. And the other thing, too, is that you were supposed to make your own clothes. Yeah, you make your own clothes. A lot of the original fishnet shit was taking fishnet pantyhose and turning them into just sleeves. A lot of the jeans were handmade back in the original day. It was the same thing that the punks and the hippies used to do. Also, a very tight-knit community. Buy handmade gothic stuff and support the goth community. And very much tried to remove itself from mainstream. Didn't want to be mainstream. Don't want to be that. And then when you see all these normies doing it, it's like, what the fuck are they doing? I think the goth community has tried and been really, really good at trying to separate itself from mainstream and pop culture. But alas, we are here, and people will say, well, it's a subculture based off of a music genre. It's like, well, it's a little more than a music genre. When I came into the scene, it was a state of mind. It was a way of life, a lifestyle. And with that, it comes with an aspect of rebellion. And it's not asking for everyone to join us, so therefore it can become pop. It was like, no, you stay over there and do your thing, and we're going to be over here being weird and bizarre. And stop trying to be weird and bizarre like us and trying to make it trendy. I will say that what they're doing with goth today is ultimately what's going to make it survive. And it will become a legacy thing like hippies and punks. There's still some, a lot of it sounds like regurgitated, generic sounding stuff that was in the 80s. A lot of it does. A lot of the experimental side got taken out of it, and it's kind of like, well, that's kind of a bummer. Like to hear something new from a goth band that isn't afraid to be instrumentally different. That was one of the mind-blowing things about, when Rasputina came out. A lot of people, till you see them live, you don't realize those are not synthesizers. Those are real cellos hooked up to foot pedals. And it's awesome. Or, like Rosetta Stone taking a dulcimer and hooking that up to distortion, turning a dulcimer basically into a guitar. It's like, that's interesting. And you have people like the Gothic artist Denali Dax, who did some really interesting stuff with the sitar. And I beg to find you, I dare you to find any band that sounds anything close to the Virgin Prunes. There's just so many Gothic rock bands. Like, you could listen to one album and then listen to another album and not know you were listening to the exact same band. We don't have that anymore. It's gone to pop. And so now it's not a counterculture, it's a subculture. Well, it started off as a counterculture. It was counter to mainstream. It was very much fuck the machine, fuck the system. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to dress how I want to dress. I'm going to act how I want to act. I don't care what other people think. Fuck fashion. Fuck conformity. Fuck all that stuff. It's meant to be the outsider. And it was very nihilistic. And a lot of the goths that when I discovered the scene, were a lot like me in that aspect. And I don't know that goth has necessarily been political. In the early days, there's some political commentaries here and there. I would say it probably veers more left-leaning, but it's not collectivist, it's individualist. Like, it's very, very much like pro-freedoms and be yourself, and not judge others, and it's okay to be weird. I think a lot of homosexuals back then found solace in the goth community, because the goth community pretty much said, well, we don't care. Be yourself. And anti-uniform, I think it went all over all that. And so, like, yeah, the music was people who reflected that sort of mentality that started making music. And they had this interest with old, archaic type stuff, dark, cob, eerie, and yeah, it was a lifestyle. It was a state of mind. There's a lot of bands that the goth community clung to, that they were like, we're not goth. We have nothing to do with that. I don't understand. Well, it's because your music was really dark, and us goths really loved that. So that's it. It was a counterculture. And it wasn't just based off of music, it was art, literature, movies, all kinds of stuff. And going into the scene back then, when I found it, if you didn't have anything from these collections, like not just music, but you'd have to hit all the categories, at least something in all the categories, and the frame of mind. And if you didn't hit those, you were labeled a poser. And the original goth scene, they didn't care if it was family friendly and open to these different groups of, like, I heard about a goth club playing Britney Spears because they wanted to be more inclusive towards people who like that kind of music. back when I found the goth community, very much to my happiness, you know, if you went in there listening to like Mariah, like if you were blaring Mariah Carey, I mean, you know, you'd get glared at, like, the fuck you listening to? I don't listen to Mariah Carey. Fuck that. She's a pop whore. So that's what it was. That's what it was. Now it's a fashion statement. You know, for me, being goth isn't a phase. It's not a fashion statement. It's not just about music. You know, one of my goals in life is to obtain and own a human skull because I really, really, really fucking like them. I really want a real human skull. I want a historical one, not one of the medical ones. Medical ones have hinges and screws and shit in, and they've been bleached. Now, fuck that. I want a historical one. Because they don't have the hinges and crap in them, and they've not been bleached. But they're insanely expensive. And then they can get up to like $5,000. They're expensive. But I want one so bad. I just think they're pretty. I like them. I like human skulls. I want one. I have other skulls. I have a stuffed crow. Because I like that kind of thing. And I'm not afraid of it. I don't care. And it just adds to the decorum. You know, I have my stuffed crow and my fake human skulls. Not a real one. But I have my fake human skulls and my taxidermy crow. What is that? That is a raven. And then you play something like Nosferatu, like their song Cassandra, or Chrysandra, and it's just a beautiful ensemble. You know, especially when you have some black curtains and they're vivaciously blowing in the wind, and you have candles, and you have, you know, the pipe organs and the cellos and the dark, glowery sort of vocals, and, you know, you just feel like, oh, this is home. It feels like, you know, like I'm in a haunted castle or something like that, and I live here. It's beautiful. But overall, goth rep, it's not just the death of decadence, it's the death of a lot of things. It's just death. I mean, why do you think they called Rozz Williams' work death rock? He was really good about writing about death. The existential crisis. So, yeah, goth is a counterculture. That's how it started. It's pop culture now. That's probably what's going to make it survive. I wouldn't say necessarily pop, but, you know, it's kind of like it's turned into something different. Now it's a music genre and fashion. Meanwhile, old OGs like me, trad goths, I guess is what the kids call it, whatever. That was another thing. The type of cigarettes you were supposed to smoke as a goth: cloves or Lucky Strikes. You know, where it's probably going to become like a niche thing, like hippies and like real hippies and real punks. You know, you'll meet people that are like, oh, I like this stuff, but they're not part of the, you know, the thing. And then you'll meet people like me where it's like, well, this guy's like fucking legit. Like he's so fucking goth. He wants a fucking human skull, like for real, for real. and yeah, so this video has gone on long enough. So it's been a while. If you have any questions about Goth, because you don't know much about it, feel free to leave them in the comments, but I don't really much care for Angela Benedict. I don't really care for Cemetery Confessions. I don't really care for a lot of Gothic YouTubers. They're young, and they have this notion that Goth is, well, some sort of fashion or specifically tied to music. Anyway, like, share, subscribe, comment, questions in the comments. I'll try to leave some links to some Gothic Rock songs in the description, and with that, I'm out.